Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for spending your money to come here and taking your time to come here and speak to the speakers. You're all appreciated, every one of you. Without you, these events could not happen. So anyway, on to the talk. I'm going to be talking about the Amerithrax, which is the 9/11 anthrax attacks. And just in case people are not quite sure what anthrax is, it's a bacillus that's in the soil, and it usually is a threat to livestock, and human beings get infected with contact from a diseased animal, and it's very rare in the natural world, thank God. But however, if it's weaponized, then it becomes much more lethal, and they can process it into very fine powder with 1 to 20 microns in diameter, which is just minuscule. And if it enters the lungs, which is the pulmonary form of anthrax disease, that's the most lethal form of the disease, and that is relevant to the 9/11 anthrax attacks. So what are we talking about when we're talking about the 9/11 anthrax attacks? Well, there were two waves of these attacks. They were spores that were sent in letters. The first lot of letters were sent to the mainstream media. Most of the offices were in New York, except for one that was in Florida. And they were all postmarked 18th of September 2001 from Trenton, New Jersey. And then the second wave of letters that contained anthrax spores were sent to two Democrat senators, Thomas Dassey and Patrick Leahy, and the same postmark, Trenton, New Jersey, but the 9th of October 2001. Now, the second wave of letters were extremely, highly sophisticated, weaponized anthrax, as if the first wave wasn't. It was, but the second wave even more. And Congress and the other government buildings had to be closed because they were contaminated with these spores. It caused massive disruption to the Postal Service because likewise they could have been contaminated with these spores. And the decontamination cost was over $1 billion. So it was a quite significant event. And 22 people were infected, and 5 people, unfortunately, died. So this is a crime that's been committed, and there should be what's called a standard investigation procedure that should have been carried out, which means who has the means to carry this out? So the skills, the equipment, the money, the knowledge. Who has the method to carry this out, the procedure or the set plan, etc.? And who has the motivation? So that's a reason for committing the crime, the belief system that motivates them to do this crime. And also opportunity to actually commit the crime as well. And most importantly, facts should not be made to fit a already predetermined theory. Facts should be gathered up, and a theory should be extrapolated from the facts. And the theories have to be tested by the facts. Now, did the FBI follow up this SIP, Standard Investigation Procedure? I don't think so. So I'm going to show you why I don't think so. First of all, the FBI's first theory was that Iraq and Al-Qaeda did it. Iraq was the sponsor of the 9/11 anthrax spores, and Al-Qaeda were the people that carried it out. And a senior FBI official says that the Bush administration was heavily pressurizing them to put the blame on Iraq because they were so desperate, the Bush administration was so desperate to have a case for going to war. So this is a typical strategy of tension that we know about, which is a phrase that Daniela Ganser very sensibly have given us in his look on terrorist incidents. So the idea is to make people so afraid that they're going to give up their freedom for security. So between September the 11th and the 3rd of October 2001, the media was saying, expect anthrax bioterrorism from the same source as 9/11. So the media and the Bush administration and the FBI were saying all this. They said if we attack Iraq, we'll have a good chance of bioweapons attacks. So how did they know that we were going to have these anthrax attacks? On what intelligence are they telling us, warning us this? And why can't we see this intelligence that they supposedly had? So anyway, let's have a look at the 9/11 hijacker connection. The Centre for Civilian Biodefence Strategies examined this, and they've come across this fact that the 9/11 hijacker Ahmed al-Hasnawi attended a Florida hospital with a dark lesion on his leg, which was consistent with cutaneous anthrax. So that's not proof, but it's a possibility of a link between one of the hijackers and anthrax. And some of the 9/11 hijackers actually attended a Florida flight school, which was very near one of the workplaces, the American media workplace, which had one of the first victims of the anthrax attacks. So when we look at Mohammed Atta, this is very interesting. He's the 9/11 lead hijacker, supposedly. In June 2000, he went into the USDA, US Department of Agriculture, and asked for a loan for crop dusting equipment. And he made it quite obvious who he was. He brought attention onto himself almost deliberately. He was a very angry person, and he was shouting a lot. He said, "Make sure you spelt my name right." He even pointed to a picture of the Twin Towers that was behind the woman's desk and said, "They're coming down." He even talked about how he admired Osama bin Laden and how he wanted to learn to fly. So why was he so keen to draw attention onto himself? I mean, it's a bit strange, isn't it? Because surely if he was one of the culprits, the least thing he wants to do is bring attention to himself. The 9/11 Commission totally ignored this particular incident. So in February 2002, Colin Powell makes the case for war with Iraq by holding up a simulated test tube of anthrax spores. So that's him making the case for war and saying Iraq was the culprit for the 9/11 anthrax attacks. Well, the first theory of the FBI starts unravelling because, well, for a start, ABC News keeps reporting that Fort Detrick is stating that Amerifrax contains bentonite. Bentonite, they say, is to do with the Iraq biowarfare program. Now, bentonite was in the Iraq biowarfare program, but that had been discontinued well before 2001. And however, in 2007, the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology actually proved that there was no bentonite in the spores. So Amerifrax was not the culprit was not Iraq. The FBI were forced to admit that 9/11 anthrax had to have come from a US biowarfare laboratory because what you add to the anthrax spores is its DNA, is its signature, and it gives you a clue where the origin of the spores came from. A silicone tin signature was discovered in the 9/11 anthrax spores, and that has long been used by US laboratories. So it's quite clear that the FBI did not follow up the standard investigation procedure. They were trying to get the facts to fit a predetermined theory that Iraq was the culprit and Al-Qaeda was the culprit. So we had a lot of media propaganda in the West, particularly America, of course. Very interesting to see the mainstream media not doing its job properly and asking the awkward questions that it should have been. Between September 2001 to 2003, the media link Iraq and Al-Qaeda to the anthrax attacks over 500 times. And they all quote from the same unnamed intelligence source. How convenient, and they don't even question this source. And they're hoping to repeat it enough times people are going to believe it. When the ABC news reporter Brian Ross was confronted about spreading false connections between Iraq and anthrax letters, he just brushed it off as an inconsequential error. But I don't think Iraqi citizens will think it was an inconsequential error. So the second theory that the FBI came across, decided to come across, construct, they said, well, it has to be a lone individual that created the anthrax spores. And they claimed that you could do it for as little as $2,500 using readily available laboratory equipment from various stores. However, this was proved to be absolutely ridiculous because the Merifrax is an aerosoled form which demands very sophisticated, very advanced knowledge, training and equipment. You could not buy it from any department store and cobble together some kind of way of constructing this. So the first suspects that they picked on were some doctors. Perry, as you can see, they've been listed here. Stephen Hatfield, in particular, sued for $5.8 million in damages in ones. They were really desperate to find a lone person that they could scapegoat for this. The FBI and the Bush administration, interestingly enough at this time, drop all mention of a Merifrax linked to the 9/11 hijackers. Why? Because it didn't fit the lone nut theory anymore, and yet it was an important clue in the investigation, but they drop it as soon as it didn't fit their pet theory. So the scapegoat they picked on was Dr. Bruce Ivins, because he had a little bit of mental instability, supposedly. He was the sole suspect, and he worked at Fort Detrick in Maryland, which is the USAMRID, US Army Military Research and Investigation Department. And he supposedly kills himself with an overdose of codeine and Tylenol in August 2008. And that's convenient for the FBI because they closed the case. February the 19th, 2010, they closed the case on who did the 9/11 anthrax attacks. And they never had to prove their case in court. Very convenient. So let's go back to the actual anthrax spores of 9/11. They're the Ames strain. And in nature, it was isolated from a cow in Texas in 1980. And it was sent to USAMRID, that's Fort Detrick, and to 15 other US laboratories and 3 other countries. You've got at least 4 variants of the Ames strain. The 9/11 Ames strain is a clue as to, where it came from, where it originated, who the suspects might be. It's highly toxic, it's very lethal, it's concentrated, and it's very, very rare. The spores differ all from the Ames strain. The senator's letters had an extra fine powder that literally just floats out the envelope. Not like that. That's talcum powder. If that was anthrax, that would have gone spreading all over this building, and it would be contaminated, and we would have to take ciprofloxacin or something. So the spores were extremely small. Let's go back to the anthrax letters for a little bit. The 3 that are very interesting are the only ones that the FBI has released to the public, and we have to ask, why aren't they releasing the other anthrax letters? What are they hiding? So the ones they've released to the public are the 2 to the senators, Senator Dassey, NBC, Tom Brocco from New York Post. And as you can see, the writing is the same, the date is the same, and it looks like somebody's trying to make it look like they're kind of illiterate Muslims, because it says, take penicillin now, which is misspelt. Allah is great, death to Israel, death to America. We have the anthrax, you cannot stop us. I mean, it sounds like a bit too convenient script here, really. That they're obviously trying to link it to the 9/11 hijackers. Maybe that's why they don't want to release the other letters, because they dropped the link to the 9/11 hijackers once they took up the lone nut theory. So why the two senators? Well, very interesting. Congress was debating the Patriot Act, which the Bush administration wanted to pass after 2001. And so Congress was a target. Bush wanted the Patriot Act to be passed before the 9/11 shock wore off. The Senate had a Democratic majority at the time, and Patrick Dassley, he was the Senate Majority Leader, and he decides on when a bill is discussed and when a bill is going to be voted on. And Thomas Leahy is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and looks at any bill and the effects it may have on civil liberties, which, of course, the Patriot Act had a massive impact on civil liberties. It was a massive erosion on civil liberties. So all they were doing was their usual congressional scrutiny, but for the Bush administration, that wasn't good enough. They were too slow, and they were being blamed for slowing up the Patriot Act and somehow being unpatriotic. The question to ask us is, how could the 9/11 hijackers have the ability to have seen into the future and knowing that they should be targeting those two senators? So the FBI's second theory of the lone nut starts to collapse only in 2011, really. 4 reports discredit the FBI. As you see, they're listed here: Lawrence Livermore, Sandia National Laboratories, the Government Accountability Office, National Academy of Sciences. The FBI did not use the newest methods, which could have proved or disproved where the spores came from. And the letters, as for Ivan's flask, they couldn't prove a link from Dr. Ivins to the crime. And it's quite clear that the second theory did not follow the standard investigation procedure. A very interesting point to raise as well is this looks like somebody trying to deliberately destroy evidence here, because the anthrax archive was destroyed, and that was between October the 10th and the 11th, 2001. The FBI actually allowed Iowa State University, which had the anthrax archive, they allowed them to destroy this archive, and it had over 70 years of data with hundreds of files. And if that hadn't been destroyed, then a match between the Amerithrax Ames and the strain in the collection would have shown. And it would have shown us when the bacteria was actually isolated, how widely it had been distributed, and genetic clues could have also identified the perpetrators. And scientists have quite rightly said that destroying this evidence this destroyed evidence was crucial for the investigation. So that sounds very suspicious. So, reinvestigate Amerithrax. Yes, that's exactly what we need, March 24th, 2010, Attorney Barry Kissin writes a report to Congressman and physicist Russ Holt. And the committee are given documents with sections redacted. Why? Why were the sections redacted? And why can't we, the public, see what was in these redacted documents about the anthrax attacks? And there is no evidence that you can manufacture a sufficient quantity of spores from Fort Detrick, where Ivins worked. Absolutely no evidence. Russ Holt said the United States needs an independent review of the investigation. And I'd say they need to start by using the standard investigation procedure, which they should have done from the beginning. So who could be the other Amerithrax suspects? Well, I'd like to raise the hypothesis that it could be what's called the deep state hypothesis. Since the 1990s, the CIA have been weaponizing anthrax. Between 2011 and 2012, scientific evidence shows that the silicone tin signature that was in the 9/11 anthrax, it's impossible for a single person to have manufactured that anthrax. It requires a laboratory with special expertise, not found at USAMRIID, which is Fort Detrick, but it is possible to manufacture that silicone tin signature used in the anthrax attacks on 9/11. It is possible at Dugway Laboratories, which is a US Army testing ground in Utah, and it is possible at Bethel Memorial Institute, Iowa, which works for the CIA and the US military with facilities for Amerifrax spores. The FBI ignored this. Why? Sounds like it was deliberate. And we also have evidence of CIA covert anthrax programs. A leaked report in 1999 where the CIA analysed a hypothetical anthrax attack via the mail with 2.5 grams, a maximum amount that could be posted without detection. The powder was 1 trillion spores per gram, and the senator's letters, 2 grams, and the same spore concentration. Coincidence? Also, we've got Dark Winter Exercise, June 2001, where smallpox simulated attack was to be blamed on Iraq. Then we have Project Clear Vision to assess bioagent dissemination of bomblets. And that was closed down due to suspicions its findings could be used in covert US bioweapons programs. And then we have Project Bacchus, 1999 to 2000, to see if it was possible to build a bioweapons facility with off-the-shelf equipment, which was one of the claims the FBI had made over the 9/11 anthrax attacks and was proven to be ridiculous. We also have a whistleblower from the FBI. He actually was the head of the 9/11 anthrax attacks investigation, so he's really top level. He comes out of the woodwork on April the 8th, 2015. He says the FBI investigation was understaffed, it lacked bioterror forensic skills, there were no senior microbiologists, and they gathered a staggering amount of expulsory evidence, that means showing that Ivins was completely innocent. This evidence still remains secret, so we have to ask why. Why are they keeping all this evidence secret? No fibres, no hair, no handwriting match with the letters and Dr. Bruce Ivins. Over 400 people had access to Ivins' flasks anyway, but we know that it didn't come from Fort Detrick where he worked. That's been proven. So the deep state hypotheses, well, what have we got to go on that the deep state or the shadow government exists in the US? Well, President Eisenhower warned us about it in his farewell speech in January 1961. He said we have to guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex, and that there could be a disastrous rise of misplaced power. And then we've also got a Pentagon insider in 2011 saying continuing small wars or the threat thereof are essential for the MICC, the Military-Industrial Congressional Complex. And we also have Michael Lofgren, who was a Congress staffer for 28 years, so this is an insider's knowledge here. He talks about a shadow government, the deep state, which rules America, consisting of intelligence, military, security, judiciary, corporations, and organised crime. And this book was released in January 2016. I recommend reading it because he knows what he's talking about. So I think that that should have been part of an investigation into the 9/11 anthrax attacks. So the culprits, they had the deep state, they had the means, they had the method, they had the motivation, they had the opportunity. They were able to attempt to cover it up and destroy the evidence. And let's not forget that they also have the US government advisors, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Kissinger, are all disciples of Leo Strauss, who promotes a militant foreign policy aimed at regime change. and Machiavelli, who also says leaders should lie to the people to achieve their goals and to create disorder so that people crave order. So I'd say that the deep state, the shadow government, that there's a strong possibility that they exist. It's not saying that everybody in those fields are party to the deep state. No, of course not. Otherwise, we wouldn't have whistleblowers coming out of the woodwork and blowing the whistle. But the important thing is that it looks like it exists, and they lied then, and they're lying now on practically everything that's happening today. Thank you very much.